Good morning from Kazán. This is Thursday, October 24th, the third day of the BRICS summit being held in this city. Yesterday was the major event with the restricted and broader BRICS meetings taking place. So coming out of that were a number of documents, including the Kazán Declaration that represents the 100 and something points of agreement among the BRICS countries. Also from yesterday, I've got some news for you about EIR participating in a press conference with the top advisor to the Russian president, as well as some interesting news on a bilateral meeting. So to jump into what I think would be one of the biggest things that actually led into the BRICS summit is the development that occurred between China and India. So the relations between these two countries have been difficult since 2020, when there were border skirmishes along what's called the line of actual control, which forms part of the border between the two countries. For example, at the BRICS summit last year in South Africa, President Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi encountered each other, but they did not have a bilateral meeting. Now, just the day before they arrived in Kazán for the BRICS summit, the two countries announced that they had reached some sort of arrangement for disengagement along that line of actual control, that this is a big step towards peace and an avoidance of any potential for military conflict between these two neighbors, which is excellent because the status had been that direct flights between the two countries had been canceled, students weren't crossing the border, journalists weren't going to each other's countries. So this is extremely important. The two leaders met yesterday for the first time since 2019 in a structured setting. The exact discussion of what they talked about, we don't know, but based on their press accounts, based on their press statements, the fact that they met and had this relationship is extremely important. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, I'll tell you what he tweeted. He said, "India-China relations are important for the people of our countries and for regional and global peace and stability. Mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual sensitivity will guide bilateral relations." So that's wonderful. Now let me tell you about a couple of questions that EIR was able to ask to Mr. Kobyakov, who is a top advisor to Russian President Putin. He held a press conference yesterday talking about many things. I'll tell you what we were able to ask him. The first was about the relationship between the BRICS, the Global South, and the West. The question essentially was that although the BRICS is not anti-West, the West is anti-BRICS. This causes the danger of conflict, either Ukraine backing Israel and a potential strike against Iran, extremely dangerous. So what can the Global South do to help change the West? The presidential advisor said, "We hope that the Anglo-American elites will respond positively." But he said, "We do have a doctrine of nuclear deterrence. Pax Americana will end. The question is, will the world go down with it?" Very sobering response. We had a follow-up question about the specific danger regarding the potential for Israel to strike Iran in a way that could lead to what would become unavoidably eventually a nuclear confrontation. The presidential advisor said that he hopes or thinks that the Jews are people with common sense and that Russia does not approve of what is happening in the Gaza Strip. "We think half or more of Israel," he said, "does not approve of this action." The question is, he says, what will the people of Israel do? Will they reclaim their statehood? Will they reclaim their sovereignty? Will they make their voices heard? He also said that he thinks the US is questioning whether it is doing the right thing, and that there is much opposition to this policy within the US as well. He said, maybe after hearing the speeches during the BRICS meetings, they will come to their senses. We hope so. We should hope so. So now let me go through some of the outcomes of yesterday from the official BRICS meetings. The Kazán Declaration itself, issued yesterday, has 134 points of agreement. I'll go through some of these. One of the main issues is what they call multipolarity. It shows, they say, a commitment to a developing a representative, legitimate, democratic, and accountable international and multilateral system. They called specifically for reforms or changes in the UN Security Council, in the World Trade Organization, in the IMF, in the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the World Bank, and others. One of the specific things that came up was the danger of unilateral sanctions and the risk that this poses to international trade. They said, quote, "We recognize the crucial role of the BRICS in the process of improving the international monetary and financial system, with a view to making it more responsive to the needs of all countries. Unilateral coercive measures, such as sanctions, they say, have implications for human rights, including the human right of development." The BRICS nations made a statement against the ongoing violence in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and in southern Lebanon. They said that, quote, "As a result of the Israeli military offensive, which has led to mass killing and injury of civilians, forced displacement, and widespread destruction of civilian infrastructure." They called the pager and cell phone attack in Lebanon last month in September. They said that it constitutes a grave violation of international law. It also raises the question of securing supply chains in the world, something that they took up later as part of a broader discussion of trade. On Afghanistan, the BRICS countries called for uninterrupted flow of humanitarian assistance, while also calling on the authorities there to end their effective ban on girls' secondary and higher education. On finance, and this is one of the biggest things, the role of the new development bank was really very much lauded. This came up in a major way. Dilma Rousseff has been a featured participant in this BRICS summit, as in past ones, and including the one in, obviously, Fortaleza, Brazil, which is what launched the new development bank. So this came up a great deal, and here's what they had to say. "We recognize the crucial role of the BRICS in the process of improving the international monetary and financial system, with a view to making it more responsive to the needs of all countries." They said that unilateral coercive measures, meaning sanctions, have serious implications for human rights. And among human rights, they include the right to development. How do sanctions affect this human right? Good question. The need for new cross-border settlement mechanisms came up. The statement was a bit tepid on this. It did not really commit to anything terribly strong, but it acknowledged the importance of working out the feasibility of new methods of cross-border financial infrastructure. It speaks of an institution they call BRICS Clear to help this, and also the potential for a BRICS reinsurance system to address the needs for this, for transportation and so forth. Specifically on this, Russia itself, this is not the whole BRICS statement, Russia put forward what they call a BRICS grain exchange to start with grain, to start with food commodities, and use that as a basis for starting to develop new markets and new methods of exchange. They're hopeful that this could then expand into other commodities and precious metals and so forth. President Lula of Brazil, who spoke remotely due to a small medical mishap, he said, "Now is the time to move forward in creating alternative means of payment for transactions between our countries. It's not a question of replacing our currencies," said the Brazilian president, "but we must work to ensure that the multipolar order we are aiming for is reflected in the international financial system. This discussion needs to be tackled with seriousness, caution, and technical soundness, but it can no longer be postponed." Lula also brought up expansion of the membership of the new development bank. On the health front, the BRICS expressed support for collaboration on tuberculosis, on early warning systems for communicable diseases, and for expanding the work of the BRICS R&D Vaccine Center. There were other things that we'll talk about more in some detail at another time, such as tax cooperation, collaboration among countries to make sure no one is cheating on their taxes, this sort of thing. Science, technology, innovation, this is recognized as being crucial to economic growth. And so this came up as a significant factor. And on the cultural front, there was a promotion of tourism and of sports, and kind of in an interesting way. So the BRICS Games were held in Kazán in June, brought together sporting participants from the BRICS countries and also beyond, not only the BRICS countries. The creation of alternative sorts of institutions, such as this alternative to the Olympics, is understandable, but it's also regrettable, isn't it? Because what should be a universal institution, countries are feeling forced to do something else. The issue of women's sports came up in particular on this. So that brings me to a few issues I'd like to bring up. And these are criticisms some are about the BRICS process itself, but very significantly, it's a question about the West's relationship to this process. The growth of new parallel institutions, some of this would be good anyway, but of course much of this is driven by the fact that unilateral measures are taking countries such as Russia or embargoed Cuba out of their access to the fora that they should be a part of. So the lesson, I think, for Western countries to take from this is that you've got to stop opposing this BRICS process. This is not an anti-West alliance. It truly isn't. Now, it's almost impossible to see it that way, though, from Western eyes that intend hegemonism. So until we break through and create a new platform for international relations, the new security and development architecture that Schiller Institute founder Helga Zepp-LaRouche has called for, the Anglo-American, NATO, the West is making an enemy where there needn't be one. The other issue I did want to bring up is the issue of the green ideology. Now, while almost every world leader spoke, or perhaps they all did, spoke about the need for decarbonization and addressing climate change and so forth, this came in two different flavors. Part of it was a recognition that climate rules should apply differently to developing countries than to the so-called Western ones. The other issue was in distinguishing between building up resilience to the effects of nature, which always changes. I mean, every 100 years, there's a 100-year flood in whatever region you're looking at. So how do we build a new type of infrastructure platform to create a synthetic environment in which human beings are better nurtured and better protected than under what nature provides off the shelf? I mean, to me, this is really the way to approach issues of climate and weather and so forth. So, China's very pleased with its leadership in producing electric vehicles, photovoltaics, lithium batteries, and so forth. But this is, I think, a weak point and a potential to stifle or stunt the development that would otherwise be very natural among this grouping. So let me conclude. The world is changing, but the Western elite are intent on promoting conflict via Ukraine, which could become nuclear directly, via carte blanche given to Israel for its attacks on anyone they want to, which could include Iran. Could that cause Iran to pursue nuclear weapons? Could Israel launch strikes in Syria and strike Russian soldiers? Could Hezbollah take out American soldiers manning missile defense systems in Israel? The dangers are enormous. This could literally be the end of the world, or at least of meaningful human life on it, for centuries or millennia to come. So the message from the BRICS conference, I think, is that a new way of looking at the world is necessary, and that it is in the self-interest of my country, the United States, and the West, as it's called, to be a part of this new system, to help contribute to it, to help shape it, and not oppose it in demanding that we stick to a world that is gone and over. That's what I'd like to share with you today. This is Jason Ross with EIR News in Kazán, Russia.